Me and My Bones series. So thank you for joining me, whether it's live or on replay. And today I'm going to be talking about statistics, or more specifically, how to avoid being blinded by statistics. Because when we have a new diagnosis to deal with, or anything else to be honest, but this is what I'm talking about specifically, we tend to find we get inundated with information. And when it's something medical, often a lot of that information comes in the form of research and numbers and statistics, and it's easy to get overwhelmed by them. So I want to talk about two different aspects of numbers, statistics, and how you can make sure that you don't get blindsided by numbers that somebody else gives you, you read, or whatever. So the reason this is so important to me is that prior to becoming a hypnotherapist and a yoga teacher, I spent 20 odd years as a media analyst, a business analyst in the media sector, and statistics were my bread and butter. And one of the things that was drummed into me is absolute clarity on what you are presenting. So I'm going to talk today about two different aspects. One is the general and one's the specific. We're going to start with the specific, a specific situation, my specific situation. So in the second part of this series, I mentioned that the nurse who delivered the news to me that I had been diagnosed with osteoporosis had told me that the biggest indicator of a fall in the future is having fallen in the past. In other words, that my risk of falling now was greater than it had been before I fell. Now, even in the state I was in shock and distress, I simply couldn't let her get away with this, because all those years as an analyst meant that I immediately understood both what she was telling me and what she was not telling me, or rather what the figures she was saying meant and what they didn't mean. So, oops, sorry, should have turned that off. So naturally, I pointed this out to her in a very polite way. Statistically, of course, she was correct. I didn't have to look far to understand that when someone has had a fall, particularly when they are older, when there is a risk of fragile bones, they are more likely to fall again, statistically. In fact, this happened to my own mother. Last year, she had a fall in the garden one evening. She was shutting the ducks up, which won't come as any surprise to anyone who knows her. And at 80 or so at the time, her circumstances were very different from my own. She already had an artificial hip, so although she fell hard, her hip itself couldn't break, and as a result she broke her pelvis. Some 6 weeks later, whilst recovering remarkably well from such a major trauma, she fell again, and this time she broke her femur. So I'm the first to acknowledge that it was 100% the case that her first fall led to the second fall. If she hadn't fallen the first time, the second one wouldn't have happened in the way that it did. And this reinforces and supports those statistics that were quoted to me. And therefore, in general, when someone has fallen once, statistically, they are more likely to fall again. However, coming back to specifics, to my specifics, it's not so simple. So according to the data, I was in the same broad category as my mother. I was a woman over 50, I'd broken a bone, in fact two. That had happened as a result of a fall at home. A fall from standing was what they classified it as. Technically a low impact fracture, which arguably most people would not have broken bones from. But I didn't fall because I lost my balance. I didn't fall because I tripped over because I don't pick my feet up properly anymore. I didn't fall because my legs gave way due to chronic pain. I simply tripped over my own trousers. Not my finest moment, let's be honest, but something that is easily avoidable in the future by not wearing them again. something that has been achieved and will continue to be achieved. Moreover, although I did technically fall from standing, I was walking at speed when this happened, so there was momentum. I completely accept that what I now know is lower than ideal bone density contributed to the fact that the result of my fall was breaking both my wrists. After all, statistically, it's very unusual to do that. But that doesn't mean that my personal risk of falling over and breaking a bone is any higher today than it was back on the 23rd of March, the 23rd of April, the day before I actually had the fall and broke my wrists. Unless there is one factor that will make a difference. Unless anything were to happen that were to make me be afraid that I was more likely to fall, that was to make me lose my confidence in my ability to stay upright. Like, for example, somebody in a position of authority, like, a nurse, telling me that my risk of falling was now much higher. For more information on the power of suggestion, if you haven't already seen it, go back to part 2 of this series. So let's move now onto the bigger picture, the more general point about statistics. And this is a health warning that applies to any statistics you read or hear anywhere. It's about how the numbers are reported. Now, as I say, in my first career as a business analyst, certain things were absolutely fundamental. And one was always being clear about the difference between a percentage change and a percentage point change, or a relative change and an absolute change. I'm going to come into this, I'm going to explain what I mean by this. So when we hear about a specific treatment, and this is particularly important when we're talking about a health situation, because we are absorbing all the information, trying to work out what we want to do, scared, anxious, stressed, and so we cling on to what we're told. But whether the treatment we're talking about is drugs, supplements, diet, exercise regime, or whatever, we're often told about the results of clinical trials. So let's assume that you read that a particular treatment was shown to have achieved a 50% reduction in osteoporotic fractures. That sounds amazing, right? Definitely something that you should take seriously. Well, perhaps, but first we need some more information. A 50% change is the percentage change, the relative change. Unless you know the absolute change, the percentage point change, you don't know what you're dealing with. So let's say, for example, we have 200 people taking part in a clinical trial. Half of them receive the treatment and half of them are the control group and they've received a placebo. And to be clear, this is a completely fictional example that I've made up to make the numbers really simple. So in that control group, 40% of the 100 people sustained a fracture over the time analysed. That's as I say, I'm making these numbers up. Please don't hold on to that figure. But in this example, we're saying that 40% of these 100 people sustained a fracture over the time of the trial. In the other half of the group, the people receiving the new treatment, just 20 of them sustained a fracture. That's a fall of 50% from 40 to 20. It's also a fall of 20 percentage points because we're talking about 100 people, so every person is 1%. 40 people to 20, 40% to 20%, that is a 20% difference. I've just done it myself, a 20 percentage point difference. 50% relative change, 20 percentage points absolute change. Now, those are impressive results, and if you heard them and you're in my situation, you probably want to find out more. But what if the same group of 200 people reported that just 4 people in the control group sustained a fracture in the time being analysed? And in the trial group, just 2 did. That's still a change of 50%, a relative change of 50%, from 4 to 2. But in absolute terms, it's just 2 percentage points. 4 people, 2 people. Now, of course, that might still be something you want to look into, because any improvement has got to be worth exploring, right? But what if the treatment that you're talking about has the potential for unwanted side effects? At that point, you might want to start weighing up the advantages and the disadvantages a bit more carefully. Not least, working out what are the risks of the side effects, and do you actually have a higher risk of an unwanted side effect than you do of reducing your likelihood of falling. And again, remember that these are statistics, they are averages. It doesn't mean that you will be the person that has that fall. Because there's a huge difference in reducing your own chance of a fracture from 40% to 20% or from 4% to 2%. The thing is, though, when you report this information, if you're the person running the trial, if you're the newspaper headline writer, or even the journalist reporting the trial, it sounds far more interesting to talk about a 50% reduction than to explain that only 2 percentage points difference was actually observed. And of course, it's the impressive numbers that make for the splashy headlines. So as I say, even the people writing the reports often have a tendency to use the numbers that make their case most strongly. So why am I sharing all of this? It's really important when you're looking into the options that are open to you, whether you're talking about osteoporosis, some other condition, or something completely different, that you understand what you're being told and what you're not being told. So, as I'm doing at the moment, whatever it is that you're trying to make your decision about, please do your